Hi, just a quick forewarning before the video starts proper. I'm filming this in post. Um, I ballsed up the filming. Yeah, I accidentally, the camera that I'm filming on accidentally cut out, like partway through. So I just sort of picked up where I left off and finished the rest of the video. So there is a fairly large jump cut sort of halfway through. I've tried my best to hide it, but like the camera quality changes, the mic quality changes. I'm very sorry about all that. Um, so I hope it doesn't get in the way of too much. Uh, and I promise that in my next videos I'll try to be a bit more professional, I think is the term they use. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the video. Sorry. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Oscar da Silva, and we are going to be going through a media studies topic today. We are going to be going through charity ads. Which charity ad exactly? The WaterAid ad. Which WaterAid ad exactly? Claudia sings Sunshine on a Rainy Day. This is a joyous advert that is on the media A-level stimulus. Funny story. I had actually pretty much done this entire video. I filmed the whole thing, went through the entire course, not the whole course, but like this entire topic, talking about everything involved. And then I looked and the camera wasn't recording. So first of all, I'm a dunce. Second of all, I didn't realize that if you minimize the camera app, it stops recording. Uh, Third of all, let's just go through the whole thing again because that sounds fun. Um, but yeah. So the so the charity ad bit of the exam can come up in media language, representation, audiences, or context. So those four things are the four things that you need to know for this topic, basically. Um, and let's go through them one by one. If this video seems a little bit unorganized, it's because A, I don't have like a set script for this. It's my first media A-level, it's my first media studies video, so I'm sort of going a little bit off the cuff here. I've got a few notes, which is why I'm looking over here and not at the camera. If I'm looking over here, it's because I'm looking at like my notes and such like that, so I can actually give good information rather than just blagging on for ages, although I'll probably end up doing that. Uh, but yeah, I'll try and keep it as concise as possible. I'll try and keep stutters to a minimum. Uh, this is unedited, so I'm sort of doing it in one take. Probably a bad idea. Who knows? If you have any criticisms of the video in general, put it in the comments. If you have anything of criticisms of the information that I give, put it in the comments. I'm going to try and get my teachers to watch this as well, and hopefully they will put like some extra ideas that you can use in your exam or in your revision in the comments, or they'll just say anything that I got wrong or didn't get all of it in. So without further ado, let's get started on some of the information. So the first thing that we're going to go through is going to be context. So when you're looking at context, you sort of need to keep in mind what charity the ad is for. So as I said earlier, the ad is for WaterAid. So WaterAid is a charity which was started in 1981 that's been dealing with sort of sanitation, water hygiene, and providing water to people that don't have access to it. They've been doing it for years, and they now work with organizations in 37 African, Asian, and Central American countries, plus the Pacific region. So it's a big mainstream charity that's been doing work all over the world. So that's important to know. Another thing that is important to know in terms of context is you sort of need to look at other charity ads and how this sort of adds up. So I'm sure everyone's seen the same kind of charity ad, the thing where you've got like it's a black and white shot and you've got some piano playing in the background, and meanwhile you've got some voice over the head sort of saying millions of people in Uzbekistan die every year from lack of water. With just your donation, they can end this troublesome life, or something along those lines. You get what I'm trying to mean. And so that's sort of the convention of a charity ad. So here, what you can do is you can talk about how this ad, Claudia Sings Sunshine on a Rainy Day, is very different. Because this WaterAid ad is far more positive. You don't have the black and white, you don't have the voiceover. Instead, you've got a bright, sunny day full of color with this girl just singing a happy song while she goes to get water. And so you can sort of talk how this specific WaterAid advert subverts these expectations. However, one thing which is important to talk about is how there are also a lot of conventions that it does stick to. So at the end of the video, it reinforces a lot of these conventions because it has that voiceover sort of saying, you can donate now at this site when, you know, just 2p a year will give so many people water. Wow, this is so cool. You should donate. And that's important to talk about because that is in every charity ad. And you can also talk about how it's personalized to sort of make you feel something. It's less, I'm pitying these people, and more, wow, look at what good my donation could do, which is a different way to appeal to the audience. But we'll get into audience appeal later. You just need to know that this charity ad is an oddball when you compare it to the rest of the charity ads, but that it does share some similarities. You get me? You get me? Okay, cool. Let's move on to media language. Now, because it's a moving image, so a film, as we say in the common areas of the world, because it's a moving image, there's quite a few different points that you can talk about. These include things like cinematography, you can talk about lighting and color, you can talk about mise-en-scene, you can talk about sound, and then finally you can talk about editing. And it's sort of those 5 things that you can talk about. I think a good little anagram, I don't know if it's an anagram, but something that you can use to remember them all is CLEMS. I think, yeah, CLEMS. And that's how you can remember all the things that you need to talk about if you're dealing with a moving image and dealing with media language. So without further ado, let's talk about it. So cinematography is basically the different shots that were used in the filming. So these can include things like long shots, which is standing very far away, or like wide shots, or close-ups, that kind of thing. And so what you're going to be talking about is sort of how each of these different bits connote certain things. So in this ad, for example, you might talk about how the long shot that it uses connotes how far Claudia's journey is. Or you can talk about how the close-up of the water tap connotes how important the water is. An example here would be the camera tracks Claudia for a certain bit of the video. And so you can talk about how that connotes her journey, almost as we, the viewer, are going on the journey with her. And that's sort of cinematography. Next, you want to be talking about lighting and color. So one good thing that you want to be talking about is with color, you can talk about the blues and grays at the beginning of the video, which may sort of connote hydration, but then also like technological advancements and stuff. It's cold, but it's home. We live in Britain. It's raining all the time. So you can talk about how the greys of that connote the UK and stuff like that. Whereas on the other hand, the sort of bright yellows and stuff like that in Zambia connote a warm, friendly, happy place. It's very different from where we're from. You can also talk about how like the browns of the earth and the ground and stuff connote how desperately the water is needed and stuff like that. If you want to be a real boffin, you can talk about different kinds of lighting, including like hard lighting and soft lighting. So for example, in this video, you could say that the hard lighting connotes the heat of the sun and the need for the water, because you've got these harsh shadows coming down. Whereas the soft lighting, on the other hand, with these like soft shadows, connote that it's a warm, friendly, happy place that they're having fun with. And that's sort of the general different thing. A good thing to talk about, especially with color, is saturated and not non-saturated color. So saturated color is like bright color. It's like someone just got the paint and just went so like this would be a saturated green, whereas a desaturated color would sort of be if someone got the bit of paint but then mixed it in with some sort of whites and stuff like that, made it a bit softer, like this, for example. So you can sort of see the differences here. This is like bright, harsh, hurts your eyes. This is sort of softer, like baby wipes. But yeah, that's sort of different saturated color. So it's important to talk about those differences and use that subject-specific terminology in your exam. It's very important when you're analyzing this sort of thing to use specific terminology, because that really gets you good marks. basically means that the examiner looks at your essay and sort of thinks, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm going to give them more marks. At least that's what the teachers say, and are they lying? Who knows? But next of all, we're going to talk about mise-en-scene. So mise-en-scene is a bit of a wacky one, I find. Mise-en-scene can quite literally mean anything in the scene. So on this, you're going to want to talk about things like set, props, costume, body language, where people are placed, different movements and stuff like that. So for example, in reference to this video, you might talk about how the radio at the beginning is used as a prop to sort of connote technological advancement in the UK, whereas things like the wooden hatchets that they use later connote that it's a bit more primitive and stuff like that. A good thing to talk about in this video is you can talk about Claudia's outfit. So she's wearing a very like bright dress, or like her skirt. I'm not an expert in women's fashion or what things are called, but you can talk about how her outfit is very bright. This connotes things like positivity, stuff like that. You can talk about a bit later in the video how there's a crowd of people around the water tap, and so you can sort of say how that sort of connotes how essential this water is, but it also connotes feelings of a community, a bright and happy community. Next, we're going to talk about sound. So sound is quite interesting in this video because, as we said earlier, in normal charity ads, you'd usually get like a piano voiceover or something like that. Where this ad differs is that the sound is diegetic. So the sound is coming from the world in the video. The way diegetic and non-diegetic sound works is that diegetic is if it's coming from the world inside the video, so like noise that the characters are making, whereas non-diegetic is sound that they wouldn't be able to hear, but we can. So the singing throughout the video is diegetic, because Claudia is making the noise. So this sort of diegetic singing connotes happiness and joy, because she's just singing, she's having a good time. But also that it's natural, because it's not some auto-tuned like singer in a studio singing it, it's just her on a walk. And so you can sort of say how that connotes the naturalism in the situation. And you can talk about the laughter and cheers from the children later on, sort of connoting this happiness more. And then you can talk about the splashes of the water at the end, sort of connoting the joy that the water brings, or something along those lines. The final thing that you need to talk about for media language is editing. So the use of editing, I always find, is probably the most subtle bit of media language in terms of how things are connoted in moving video. So editing sort of comes into play when you're talking about how the different shots are cut together. So for example, not related to the ad, but if there was a action film, you'd often get lots of sharp, short cuts. This sort of shows that everything's fast-paced, it's happening at a fast speed. Whereas if you wanted to show something being really drawn out, you would use one big long shot. Get what I mean? You'll figure it out. In this video, we can see a few things. So when she's walking along, there's some very short shots. Oftentimes they're like a second or 2 seconds. This sort of shows that it's fast-paced, but also that her movements are happy and energetic. She's sort of, walking along, almost like a skip or something like that. Another thing you might want to talk about is the use of slow motion. So that's an editing thing. At the end, they use slow motion when the water falls down. And so you can talk about how that brings emphasis to the water and connotes how important it is and how crucial it is. And that's pretty much media language. So a good thing to talk about with media language, and with any topic in media really, is a few theorists. The big media language theorist is Barthes. So Barthes' Sears codes are pretty damn important. Those codes are the semantic codes, the action codes, the enigma codes, the referential codes, and the symbolic codes. You should probably know what those mean by now, and should be able to figure them out from watching the video. I would seriously suggest that you watch the video, the video of the actual ad, if you are going to be writing about this in an exam. That's fairly important. But yeah, the Sears codes are fairly simple. And then another media language code that you might want to talk about is Levi Strauss's binary opposites. So this basically says that meaning is created in media products through the use of binary opposites. So a good binary opposite for this particular video would be the grays and rainy day of the UK in the beginning compared to the dry and barren landscape of Zambia. So you would talk about how that sort of contrast presents how sorely the water is needed, or something like that. Moving on to representation. So representation I always find kind of weird to describe. I don't really know how to, but basically everything in real life is presented in a certain way. You are presented in a certain way, whether you're just walking around in a hoodie or whether you're walking around in a three-piece suit. You are presenting a way. So if we put something on a screen, it's being represented. It's being presented again. And so this, when you're talking about representation in media products, you're basically talking about how certain minority groups are being shown within a video or something like that. But I find it's best explained when you use the theorists. So the first theorist that you might want to talk about in terms of representation is Stuart Hall's theory of stereotype and inequality. This basically says that representation is formed out of stereotypes. So if you're looking at this video, you basically need to be thinking about, are the depictions in this video of Claudia, so as a woman, and of her ethnicity, is she being shown as a stereotype? I personally don't think she is, but there's different bits that you might want to talk about. So you could talk about how she's like getting water as a stereotype of her ethnicity, but then you could sort of say that the positive and bright colors is not a stereotype of how like rural Africa would work. So in that you would need to talk about like if it follows or subverts different stereotypes. The next one to talk about would be Lisbeth Van Zunen's feminist theory. I'm not a great fan of this theory because it's very foggy and vague, but it basically boils down to feminism is a thing that exists and is real, and that's sort of it. Obviously, there's a bit more to it than that, but what you'd want to talk about there is you want to talk about how Claudia's representation sort of struggles. I always find this one very difficult to describe and also quite difficult to apply because it is foggy. I'll work a bit more about that and I'll probably explain it in another video later much better than this. Might even get its own video. Who knows? Probably not. But you can link it very much to the male gaze theory. An important thing to consider in relation to this theory, to this video, is how has cultural context affected our understanding of gender? So do we see Claudia as a woman any differently because of her culture? So how does culture influence gender? So you want to talk about that. That's pretty good to talk about. Another theory to talk about is Paul Gilroy's theory of ethnicity. This one's a bit of an oddball, doesn't really turn up in a lot of the other texts, but this one basically says that colonial ideas continue to inform contemporary attitudes to race and ethnicity in the post-colonial era. What that means is that because we're European, do we see people in Africa any differently because we're European? It's that kind of thing of, does your ethnicity change the way that you view things? Important things to consider in relation to this video is how the representations within the advert create a dominant relationship between the UK audience and developing countries. So do we see ourselves as better because we're in the UK and we're in a flourishing country, or because they are in a developing country like Africa? It's that kind of thing. The final theory to talk about, which is my personal favorite because I'm a cool guy who has favorite media theorists, is Paul Gauntlet's pick and mix theory. The reason that this is my favorite is because I find it relatively easy to apply this theory to many things, and also I think it works quite well. This theory basically says that when we watch media texts, we look at the variety of different representations and we take bits out of them and use them to form our own identity. So with this theory, you basically want to be talking about how varied the representations are in the video, and sort of if you're forming your identity from them, how varied can your identity be? A good thing to talk about for this video is that if you're like a young black girl watching it, how could you piece together your identity out of the representations in the video? So here you probably want to say how a lot of the representation is very positive and how they suit it well. And that's pretty much it for representation. Again, the thing with representation is that you'll probably be asked, the same thing with media language actually, is that you'll probably be asked to compare. The thing with this part of the course, so this text in particular, you will probably end up comparing it to another charity ad. In the exam, you'll be given 3 chances to watch the ad, so you'll sit down, watch the ad. Kind of similar to music videos, if I recall correctly. I may be wrong. My teacher will watch this video, check the comments down below to see if they've corrected me on anything here. So moving on, we have audience. So audience is basically which type of person would watch this video, who does it appeal to, and why does it appeal to them. So with this, there's many different ways that you can sort of split up people. The first is through age, and the second is through economic status, and the third is through a little thing called psychographics. Age is pretty self-explanatory. Economic status basically is a range from E to A, going E, D, C2, C1, B, and then A. So E is like, I am homeless and I have no money, and A is like, I'm Jeff Bezos and I should be eaten. Not actually going to eat Jeff Bezos, but A is, I am very rich and I have a lot of money. The thing to note is because this is a charity ad, basically C2, D, and E, because these kinds of economic groups don't have money to spare, this advert isn't really going to appeal to them because they can't give money away. Whereas C2, B, C1, B, and A have that spare money, so this will appeal to them more. The second is psychographics. So psychographics are essentially a way of explaining different personalities or different desires or different goals in people. This goes mainstreamers, which is pretty self-explanatory, aspirers, who are people who want to look better. We have succeeders, who are people who, well, want to succeed. The resigned, who are sort of traditional and rigid, and they're sort of stuck in their old ways. We have explorers, who want to look for new things. We have strugglers, who are just sort of just getting by. And then finally we have reformers, who want to make the world a better place. If you ask me, this ad will sort of appeal to reformers most, because it's a charity ad. They want to make the world better, so charity would be the way to do that. An important thing to look at here and keep in mind when you're watching the video is how might different aspects appeal to certain people. So, for example, the use of a young black woman might appeal to young black women because they can identify with it, because they sort of feel like they're being spoken to directly because it's them. Or if you are a parent, this video might appeal to you because there's lots of children involved. So you might have a maternal feeling of, I want to look after these people, I want to do better for them like I would with my own children. And yeah, those are the kind of things that you want to be talking about. Another thing to mention with this video is that it's unusually positive. So you sort of got to think, does the positivity appeal to people more than like one of the very negative ads would be like? There are a few theorists to consider when you're talking about audience. The first one is Gerbner's theory of cultivation. Now what this one basically says is that when you are told something multiple times by an ad or a media text, you start to believe it, you start to follow along with it. Like this is it's basically how like propaganda would work. That's a bit of an extreme example, but that's basically what it's going at. So you sort of need to try and think in terms of this ad, what kind of ideas or messages are being pushed here. Because if that idea or message is pushed enough times, people will start following it. And you sort of got to think about the impact that this ad could have on a large scale. The second theory that you want to talk about is by Stuart Hall. So he's got more than one theory, I know, amazing. But his audience theory basically says that there are 3 different readings or ways that people can receive a text. They can basically agree with it, they can disagree with it, or they can sort of be somewhere in between. So it's called the agreed reading, opposed reading, and negotiated reading. The negotiated reading is sort of, I agree with some parts of the video, but some parts I don't like. So, for example, the sort of preferred reading, which is the positive reading, would be something like, yes, I'm going to go donate right now. All these are fair and valid points. I like WaterAid, and this is a good, positive representation of the work that they do. An oppositional reading might be something like, this is false, this isn't what it's like, WaterAid is a bad charity that doesn't actually do this, it doesn't actually help. And a negotiated reading would be something like, I don't think WaterAid helps to this extent, but it's a good example of what might be, or something like that. Those are the sort of two that you want to be talking about in terms of audience theory, and also, as we said earlier, the different things that you want to be considering that might inspire different people or apply to certain people. And that's pretty much it. As I said earlier, you'll probably be comparing this ad to something else. But yeah, that's it. I know this is a long video. If I'm not mistaken, it might be about like 20 minutes or so. So quite long. And I don't know which bits are where, but you can sort of cut and jump through. I don't know why I'm saying this at the end of the video. But I hope it will be a useful resource for myself and others to use in the future. If you've made it this far, thank you. Do subscribe. That's a self-plug, but yeah. Do that. I'm making more videos. I'm reading Equus as well on the channel. If you do drama, that might be quite good. I should release like a big audio file of that. But one thing I will do is I will get my media teachers to watch this video, and I will ask them to leave any feedback or stuff like that. Things that I got right, things that I got wrong, and things that I could add, and sort of different helps to the channel. But yeah, apart from that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.